Hey, thanks so much for joining us here at Gettysburg 160. We're on McKnight's Hill, more commonly known as Stevens Knoll, named after Greenleaf T. Stevens, whose battery you might see arrayed around me. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We've been going crazy for Gettysburg 160 already. We hope you're already watching our little round top coverage, some of our first shot marker coverage, as well as some of the other coverage we've done leading up to this event. We got a lot more to come. We're trying to focus on eyewitness accounts to some degree, but let me set the stage a little bit about what's going on here. And while I'm doing that, maybe you can share this with your friends so as many people can engage with this history as possible. So on July 1st, 1863, you have the Confederate Army pushing the Union soldiers back through town to Cemetery Hill, which is right next to me over here. I can see it, okay? The Union 1st and 11th Corps are going to gather sort of in general groups over there. You know the story. General Winfield Scott Hancock will famously rally the troops on East Cemetery Hill. Him and General Slocum will sort of make an agreement. Okay, you get one hill, I'll get another hill and whatnot. And, eventually you're going to have where there's mostly 11th Corps troops on East Cemetery Hill, and you have 1st Corps troops leading up toward Culp's Hill over here. I can see their trenches right over there, and that's Wadsworth's division of the 1st Corps that had fought on both sides of the Chambersburg Pike earlier. Now, importantly, this battery, this main battery that had been heavily engaged on July 1st, 1863, is going to drop their trails and some of their ammunition over that away, and then they're going to bring their guns up here, constructing lunettes, the half-moon-shaped earthworks you see to protect the cannon and cannoneers here, and they're going to just sit here. They're going to figure into some of the shelling going on at the Confederate position that we visited before called Benner's Hill, and we'll have a little bit of coverage on that during Gettysburg 160. And you're going to have them also involved in absolutely raking the Confederates while North Carolinians attack East Cemetery Hill on the night of July 2nd, 1863. Now, we're going to get into some soldier accounts here, and I'm going to bring on a good friend of ours. We have hardly any more popular guest than Professor Carroll Reardon, Gettysburg Foundation, and I could list a whole lot of other organizations before that. But Carroll, it's great to have you here. Take it away and do what you do.
Well, usually whenever I appear, somebody dies, and that's an unfortunate element of what people have come to expect from me. But today, I refuse to kill anybody off, at least right at the moment. One of the things that we want to talk about here, of course, is the action that nobody ever gets a chance to talk about. As we're standing here filming all this, we're watching a parade of cars just drive past, slow down a little bit, but hardly anybody stops. Nobody really takes the time to see what happened here. It's the evening of the second day. But even before the fighting begins, these troops that have been fighting on the first day are in this area. Off to my right, your left I guess, is Culp's Hill. Now we know all about the fighting on Culp's Hill on the evening of the 2nd, but that was mostly on the southern slopes of Culp's Hill, or on the eastern side of the slope. What about the northern part? What's going on there? Well, all we really have to do is just look right across the park road from us, and there's a small monument sitting there. There's a flag in front of it today. It happens to be a monument to a regiment with whom every one of you is familiar, and that is the 24th Michigan of the Iron Brigade. On the first day after the great fight of the 1st Corps over on McPherson's Ridge, when the remnants made it back here to Cemetery Hill, Wadsworth's division, the division that opened the battle for the Union infantry, was assigned to fill the gap between Cemetery Hill in this direction and Culp's Hill right here. And so when Stevens' battery comes and takes this position right here, protecting its right flank is the remnants of the old Iron Brigade. The regiment closest to us right here, where the small monument is today. When you visit, get out of your car, go across the street, take a look at it. It only stands this high. If I think it's a short monument, you know it's a really short monument, okay? And therein lies the story. During the fighting on July 1st, Colonel Henry Morrow was seriously wounded. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Flanagan went down with a wound that was going to make him lose a leg. The major goes down. By the time the remnants of the 24th Michigan get here, they're under the command of a senior captain by the name of Albert Edwards. And this is Albert Edwards right here. We have a nice picture with him. Now, one of the first things he felt he had to do was to let everybody else in the regiment know that he was now the man in charge. He is going to pick up the mantle of command, and he will issue an order Well, it's not really an order, it's a message to those surviving troops. He wrote this on July 2nd. I hereby assume command. In thus being called to this responsible position, it's as little desired as expected. He then began with an interesting way of motivating his men to continue. After everything that they've been through, you might think that his first inclination would be to try to make sure that you didn't focus too much on lost friends and good battle buddies. Instead, he struck a completely different tone. He looked at his men and he said, I congratulate you, brave soldiers, upon your splendid achievements of July 1st. We don't usually associate a line like that or a tone like that for a day that had ended up with great loss and a retreat. But I congratulate you, brave soldiers. A single division holding in check an entire Army Corps, the flower of the Southern Army, an achievement of which you may well feel proud. The enemy's dead in front of your lines attest your valor and skill. Again, have you merited a nation's gratitude. Now, if that doesn't get you fired up to stay the course, to stay in line, to continue the fight, I don't know what will. But at the same time, he knows that in their hearts of hearts, each one of those men is lamenting the loss of a friend. Sometimes a friend who they grew up with back in Wayne County, back in Detroit. Sometimes, and there were an awful lot of bonds broken over in Reynolds Woods on the first day. So after a brief pause, Edwards had continued, Our joy in the glory of our arms is mingled with sadness for the heroic dead on the field of honor. Let our memory of our lamented comrades inspire your hearts with new life and zeal to emulate their heroic virtues and avenge their untimely fall. And to underscore the importance of them doing so, he reminded them from where they came. Remember, 1,000 hearts are beating for you today in your own beloved Michigan, and they will bless your names and hold them in sweet remembrance. How can you as a soldier, after everything you've been through on the first day, the loss of friends, the loss of a position, a retreat, a confused retreat through the town, disorder on the hill behind us up on Cemetery Hill, being sent over to a position that you're not quite sure how it fits into the big picture yet. You just know that this is where you're assigned. And right now, when you first get here, there's only 47 of you. There were 500 when the battle started, pretty much. Now, over the night, some more will join you. And when the sun came up on the second day, when Captain Edwards gave his little message, they'd gotten back up to a full strength of 97. Started out with 500, 97 left. Fate is good to the 24th Michigan for the rest of this battle. For most of the rest of this fight, they will be spectators only. One or two will suffer minor wounds. But when they look back on Gettysburg, not everything they remember will be about July 1st. They remembered being under fire. They remembered hearing the artillery from Pickett's charge on the third day. They knew that they had participated in 3 full days of battle. And every one of them walks away with imperishable memories. But whenever you have an officer like this, like Captain Albert M. Edwards of the 24th Michigan, who can make the mission stay primary in your mind and congratulate you on being the best soldier you can be, you have a leader who is worth his weight in gold. A good way to start off our stop here. Gary.
No, Chris.
It's actually Chris.
Chris, not Gary.
Sarah, we're going to walk over this way just a little bit. Thanks, Carol. And I'm going to go from one leadership talk to a different one, and that'll be kind of a juxtapose what Henry Warner Slocum will do here at Gettysburg. That's Warner Slocum sitting up on top of that horse behind me. That is one of my favorite monuments on the battlefield. It was placed here in 1902. It's designed by Edward Potter. The base itself is made of granite. It's 16 feet high. Slocum and his horse weigh more than 7,300 pounds, and he stands over 15 feet high up there on top of his perch, looking out towards the town of Gettysburg, out towards the Henry Culp farm. And the designer, Edward Potter, of this actually designed two of the most iconic pieces in New York City. If you've ever gone to New York Public Library, or if you watch the movie Ghostbusters and you see the lion sitting out in front of that main branch of the New York Public Library, he designed those. And they're known as Patience and Fortitude. Those are the names of the lions sitting out there. Gary and I actually were up there last year filming something just outside of those lions. But Slocum is a little bit different here at Gettysburg. He turns into the right-wing commander of the Union Army of the Potomac. He is the second in command of Meade's army here, but he's a reluctant second in command. When the Battle of Chancellorsville ended in May of 1863, he had enough of Mr. F.J. Hooker, as Robert E. Lee calls him, fighting Joe Hooker, and he is going to write to friends, he is going to write to colleagues, and he is going to talk in anyone's ear who will listen about just how bad Joe Hooker is as a commanding officer. So as he comes here towards Gettysburg, he's thinking about quitting his job, which a few other officers had done on the way here. And he's writing some scathing things about his commanding officer, Joe Hooker. But when Slocum arrives in the Gettysburg area on July 1st, there's a little bit of controversy. Should he come to the battlefield or not? Because the man now in charge of the battlefield, left-wing commander John Reynolds, has been killed in action. Now that falls to Oliver Otis Howard. Howard is in nominal command of the field here at Gettysburg. The next highest ranking officer close by is Slocum down at Two Taverns. And Slocum had a bad battle at Chancellorsville with Howard as well. If you remember, Howard's on the right flank of the Union Army there and is swept away on May 2nd, 1863. But in his official report, Oliver Otis Howard throws some, to use a modern term, shade at Henry Slocum and kind of points the finger to him. He's like, well, I was under his command for a while, and maybe Slocum should have told me what to do. And Slocum coming up here doesn't really want to take over this mess that is Howard's battle, that is becoming Howard's battle. And Slocum will eventually get up here on the first day. He reluctantly takes command. Basically, when Winfield Scott Hancock gets up here and says, hey, take command. And when he does, Slocum will think that he's in charge of the right wing the entire time that he's here. He's an interesting character, to say the least. His family nicknamed him Spec, and that's short for speculator, because he always tried to make money as a kid. And he was very much an intellectual, and he looks like an intellectual if you see a picture of Slocum. He went off to West Point, graduates in 1852, and we have him to blame for Phil Sheridan graduating, because he was his tutor. So for you anti-Phil Sheridan people, you blame Slocum for helping him get outside of West Point. You either love Phil or you hate him. I've learned in this field. But Slocum goes on to serve in Charleston Harbor at a place called Fort Sumter. He's not there during the bombardment, but he becomes a lawyer while he's in Charleston and eventually comes back, comes north. He's from New York, Delphi, New York area. And when he was growing up in Delphi, he was somewhat of a leader up there. He had a little group of kids that he put together and would march them around. He would read books on Napoleon, and he loved military tactics. And at one point, the kids all pulled their money together, and this is a really good idea. They bought a cannon. So they buy this little cannon, and they're firing this little cannon off, and then the kid whose house that it was stored at moved away, and he took the cannon with him. So all the kids get very upset. They're like, hey, he stole our cannon. We should go take him, beat him up, and take back our cannon. Slocum says, no. This is what we're going to do. You guys are going to go up to the house, and you're going to make a ruckus. The rest of us are going to flank him and go around the back, and we're going to go in the barn, and we're going to steal the cannon. We don't have to beat anybody up. And that's exactly what they do. So from a young age, Henry Warner Slocum was clearly a military leader. But out here at Gettysburg, he has his monument here at Stevens Knoll. He is one of the first 3 New York generals to receive a monument here: Gouverneur Kimball Warren, George Sears Green, and then Henry Warner Slocum. Those are the first 3 to receive their monuments here at Gettysburg. But more importantly, up in this area and below the feet of Henry Slocum is a battery, Battery E, 5th Maine United States Maine Artillery. The 5th Maine had seen heavy action at the Battle of Chancellorsville. In fact, the gunners are going to fall left and right near the Chancellorsville crossroads, and 1 man or 2 men will be fielding one of the pieces, loading and firing as quickly as they can when they're finally relieved off of the battlefield. Gary will talk about that soldier in just a moment. But this position is integral to the Union line on July 2nd. as well as on the 3rd. Winfield Scott Hancock, when he took over command on the afternoon of July 1st of the field, he came down here and he personally placed these 6 guns of Greenleaf T. Stevens' battery, and I love his first name, Greenleaf, and they were able to fire off towards the north and sweep the fields from the east, heading towards East Cemetery Hill with fire. They could also fire towards the Culp farm, and this was also a very tenuous link between the crest of Culp's Hill, at that point held by Ira Grover and his 7th Indiana Infantry, ran down, as Carroll pointed out, with Wadsworth's division eventually, hooked up here, and then ran off towards East Cemetery Hill. And as that line is forming here, it seems like a really good position to be in, kind of juts out, but then on July 2nd, we can't see today, Sarah, if you pan off in that direction, we can't see into town today because there's trees there, but we could see up into the town in 1863, and that means with Confederates in the town and in the cupolas and in the steeples, they can see us. And there'll be a lot of fire coming down here. Stevens himself is wounded, and command of this battery will turn over to Edward Whittaker, who is his second in command here. So July 2nd, there's action here, but on July 3rd, there's action at Stevens Knoll that's often overlooked, and probably the most famous story from Stevens Knoll is a guy named Chase, who's a Medal of Honor recipient. And Gary, I think you want to come on and tell us a little bit about Private Chase.
I do. Thanks for all that, Chris. And let me just say real quick that there's also a story going back to Slocum real quick about, I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but of a soldier who was scared, and Slocum caught him shirking in the rear sort of, and he was kind of cowering, and Slocum started to scream at him, and at which point he started to actually cry, and Slocum said, "You miserable little baby, be a man," or something like that. And he said something to the effect of, he balled up further and said, "I wish I was a baby right now so I wouldn't have to be in this battle, and if I had a choice of being a baby, I would be a female baby," is what he said. This dude was, we don't know how we're going to react to battle. Talk to soldiers about that who have actually been in combat, unlike me. Now, we do have, as Chris said, this battery doing splendid execution, as they might have said during the Civil War, against Confederates, North Carolinians. You can read their accounts and see the view they had. Let's just look at it again, Sarah, because, man, what a view we have out above the trucks over there as the North Carolinians wheeled into this position. And one of the gunners helping, or one of the artillerymen helping to serve the gun, is a guy named John Chase, as Chris mentioned. And Chase wrote this story after the Civil War. You've probably heard of it before, but I thought, this is Eyewitness to Gettysburg. Let's do it. He said, one of their shrapnel shells, because they attracted the attention of Confederate batteries, exploded near me, and 48 pieces of it entered my body. My right arm was shattered, my left eye was put out. I was carried a short distance to the rear as dead, and knew nothing more until 2 days later. When I regained consciousness, I was in a wagon with a lot of dead comrades being carted up to the trenches to be buried. I moaned and called to the attention of a driver who pulled me among the dead and gave me water. He said my first words were, "Did we win?" I was taken to the 1st Corps Army Hospital on the Isaac Leitner Farm, 3 miles from Gettysburg on the Baltimore Turnpike. They laid me down beside the barn, where I waited 3 more days before my wounds were dressed. The surgeon let me lie there to die, to finish dying, as they said, while they attended to the rest of the wounded. I lay on the barn floor then several more days, and then was taken into the house, where I stopped for a week. Then from there I was moved to, after about 3 weeks I was carried out of the hospital. He was moved to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to a more proper hospital, and he had a long life after that, part of which I think Chris might be coming back on to talk about. Am I correct about that, Chris?
Are we talking about Avery? Or no, Chase.
No, a little bit more Chase?
Sorry, yeah. So Chase, he's Medal of Honor recipient for his actions at Chancellorsville. And in 2009, I was actually on with the National Park Service, and I was on duty whenever the family arrived with the Medal of Honor, as well as a cane that had the monument painted on here, as well as the picture that Gary was showing.
I'll tell the story of that picture in a sec.
Okay. And it's a really great highlight of my National Park Service career, was whenever his Medal of Honor was given to the National Park Service. I was there on duty with the park, and we did a whole tour for them and everything. It was fantastic.
Good, thanks, Chris. And John Chase went on to survive, and you could see he had sort of a business card or a calling card showing some of the 48 wounds onto his torso, his arm missing and whatnot. And if you look at this picture of him, he's here at the monument unveiling that you've seen already in the feed here. one of the eyes looks a little different, and you can actually see the eye that was put out that he was talking about there. And he became a docent at a cyclorama. I believe it's in Boston. So, and this was his calling card. So Chase did live longer than everybody expected. And then he went on from there. Now, in case anybody saw me drop that. Now, this goes on for a bit, and we have the Chase story, but we have to go back to July 1st, 1863, because we have additional fighting going on next to it. Remember, Chris talked about the guns covering this position, but then you've got 1st and 11th Corps troops over near the base of East Cemetery Hill, below the crest, on maybe the military crest, ready to help repulse it. And the Confederates, North Carolinians, are going to make that sweeping movement, and some of them are going to punch through. And I think that's one of the things that Carol wants to talk about, because we, the American Battlefield Trust, this is McKnight's Hill, and we preserved some of the McKnight Farm, as well as what's known as the War Museum. And there are some soldiers actually over there and fighting, and some of them did not have a happy ending here. And I think Carol's going to talk about some of them.
Yeah. Most professional soldiers would point out that this is a really interesting place, because whenever you find yourself in a situation where two different units come together, there's always the prospect for miscommunication, for some lapse in coordination. And so we're standing on what's essentially a 1st Corps position, even though General Slocum of the 12th Corps is behind us. But if we just go to your left, my right, and focus a little bit down by the, well, fortunately there's a white car going for us right now. Okay. About where the white car is right now, you can see a small monument. It's right under the tour sign. Look at the red star, or the red sign with the white star. There's a small low-to-the-ground monument to the 33rd Massachusetts Infantry. The 33rd was one of those regiments that was raised in the summer of 1862 in response to Abraham Lincoln's call for 300,000 more men. And an awful lot of men who might have been interested in joining in the first flush of enthusiasm after Fort Sumter had to pretty much bide their time and wait and be convinced that, in fact, serving the nation was something that they really felt an obligation to do. An awful lot of them had to think about it in terms of, well, do I go now and pick which unit I join and maybe go with some of my friends, or do I hedge my bets, because there was already talk about initiating conscription, the draft. And if you got drafted, you would go where the Army sent you. And it might not be with friends or even people from your home state. They might send you to a U.S. regular regiment or something like that. So if you take a look at the soldiers who served in the 33rd Massachusetts, a number of them are mature men. A number of them have families. A number of them are really have to give up something significant in order to join the war effort at this point, when it's very clear that the consequences of enlistment may include death. And that's what's going to happen here as well. As you've already heard, most of the fighting around here on the second day is going to happen on the slopes of East Cemetery Hill. We're kind of off on the flank. We're watching the North Carolinians attack basically across our front from where we are right now, heading up East Cemetery Hill. But anytime you see an opportunity to protect a flank, to attack a flank, you're going to do it, and these men in the 33rd Massachusetts saw their opportunity. If you take a look at where they are, they're not going to be frontally attacked by the North Carolinians heading up this way, but they're going to be in a good position to hammer on the left flank of the North Carolinians who are firing. In the process, a number of those men from Massachusetts would be killed. One of them was a corporal by the name of Allen. His last name was Allen. Corporal Allen, Jules Allen, was, in contrast to everything I've been saying, a fairly young man. He was only 21 years old when he enlisted, but he showed himself to be a pretty good soldier. He got himself promoted to corporal. By the time we come to Gettysburg and are serving in this action, he's been a corporal for exactly 12 days. He doesn't get to enjoy his stripes very long. We don't even know if he ever got his stripes, to be perfectly honest. But we do know that he took a mortal wound and died here on the field. Close by was another private soldier. His name was Elijah Howe. And Elijah Howe was a farmer, but 37 years old, a mature man, raising his family back in Massachusetts. And there was another private. His name was Calvin Horr, H-O-R-R. 35 years old, married man, 2 kids back at home. But these men had all chosen to volunteer rather than take their chances with the operation of the draft. Here at Gettysburg, all 3 of those men would be killed. We don't know too much about the fate of Corporal Allen or Private Elijah Howe, but we do know something more about Private Calvin Hoare, because his company commander did something pretty important. In today's military, if a soldier falls in battle, if a soldier gets sick, if something bad befalls one of the soldiers under your command, officers know that it's part of their professional responsibility to write a letter home, a personal letter home to the family of your soldier. This was not a requirement, and it wasn't even particularly a common practice back during the Civil War. So when you have one of those letters from an officer in the field to a new widow or a widowed mother or a dependent mother or a grieving father back home, it really lets us gain incredible insight into the way 19th century society handled death. Private Hoare's commanding officer was a captain by the name of Doane, Captain Doane. And this is what he wrote to Mary Hoare, the new widow. Imagine writing this, but also imagine receiving it. Mrs. Hoare, Calvin was shot in the head by a minie ball and died in a few minutes. He did not speak. I had him buried on the south side of Cemetery Hill, near an old barn where there were 3 others of our regiment buried. I stuck a board at the head of the grave. It was the best we could do for him. It doesn't say a whole lot. It kind of sounds like, well, it's the best he could do, too, to write. But he also packaged up and sent home some of the things that Mary probably found precious relics for as long as she lived. Captain Doane sent home $13.30, a watch and chain, and 2 pocket knives. Wouldn't you love to know where those pocket knives are today? Well, we have that story, and it's a story that could be replicated across this battlefield many times over.
The unit that Carol was speaking of, the 33rd Massachusetts, that's Aiden Underwood's unit. They leave a fantastic account, especially Colonel Underwood. Very specific account of him moving 1,000 paces to the front along with the 41st New York, or 9 companies of the 41st New York, out to what's East Confederate Avenue today. And then they fell back towards this position. And one of the things I found interesting about that account is when the 33rd ends up down in that lowland, there were 2 separate incidents. The first one was Underwood in his memoir, the official history of the 33rd, really builds suspense as the Confederates of Isaac Avery's brigades pushing forward. He talks about how they don't know if they're going to be able to hold. The darkness is coming over the battlefield. And then, like Vesuvius, this entire hillside opened up because the 5th Maine opened their 6 guns and fired into the flank of Avery's men, pushing them off closer towards East Cemetery Hill. And in fact, the slaughter was so great down here that Colonel Samuel Tate of the 6th North Carolina will write back to Zebulon Vance, the governor of North Carolina, saying that he is tired of North Carolinians being sent out here to the slaughter. But the Underwood's men down there fought with these North Carolinians. And there was another battle that took place after the war in the pages of the National Tribune, which is a newspaper essentially for Union veterans. And there's a private with the 33rd Massachusetts who is down in this lowland at one point, and he is complaining that the 2nd Corps, a brigade specifically under Sam Carroll, came up and actually helped to take back East Cemetery Hill after elements of Avery's brigade and Harry Hayes's Louisianans broke through the line. What I found interesting about this account, and this guy goes back and forth with veterans of the 4th Ohio, you might be able to see their monument up there, as well as the 7th West Virginia and other units. You know, these guys didn't come up there. We were here, we were protecting the line, we didn't need anybody's help. Nobody was up there helping us. And in the meantime, this guy's in the dark. He's a private, so he's not seeing a lot of what's going on. Really, he's seeing about that much of the battle. And then on top of it, when I start to read from men like Adelbert Ames, a division commander in the 11th Corps, Oliver Otis Howard, the 11th Corps commander, stating, "Thank you for coming to our assistance," to these men of the 2nd Corps, I found it interesting that the men of the 11th, still feeling that sting from Chancellorsville, feeling that sting here from July 1st of 63, and then of course their line broke for a few moments here on the evening of July 2nd, had to go to the pages in the 1880s, 90s, and early 1900s to fight back against other Union veterans who came here to their assistance. And, it was an interesting juxtaposition. And one other story that I loved from the 11th Corps, it's a sad story, I shouldn't say I love it, but it was an interesting story I found from an Ohio regiment that was just down the line from here, and there was a soldier who's actually shot in the arm, and the bullet actually carried up through the forearm and landed in his elbow and stayed there. It seemed more like a flesh wound to this sergeant, who refused to go and have it treated. And one of his pards, usually these men would get together in small squads, we would say, and they would have their meals together. Sometimes they would camp in the same tents over the winter. They might be in the same hut. One of his pards said, "Hey, you really need to go to the doctor and have that looked at." He said, "No, I'm not going to go back to the 11th Corps Hospital at the Spangler Farm. No, I'm not going back, not going back." And he said the last time that he saw him, he sat down beside the fire after the battle, was cooking over the fire. When the man went to bed that night, he never awoken. He never awakened the next day. He thought that bullet did so much damage that it may have been the culprit for his death. And he had a few different reasons for that. But there are so many stories out here that just on this slope of East Cemetery Hill, and especially up in the cemetery itself, the Soldiers National Cemetery, that we encourage you, as Carol pointed out, don't just drive past this point. Make sure you get out, you stop, check out this vantage point, because I think it's a fantastic vantage point to see out towards the Henry Culp Farm, to see the gatehouse of Evergreen Cemetery, and of course to see East Cemetery Hill, and one of the vital points here on the Gettysburg battlefield. And with that, I want to thank Gary Edelman, Dr. Carol Reardon, Sarah Byerly behind the camera, and I want to thank you for watching. Please share this. Please click that subscribe button. Please click that bell notification. And always head over to battlefields.org to learn more about what the American Battlefield Trust is all about. Also, head over to the Gettysburg Foundation. Learn more about the Gettysburg Foundation. They help to oversee the Visitor Center and the Cyclorama here at Gettysburg. They also oversee the George Spangler Farm. So that is something that you want to go and check out for sure. It's an 11th Corps hospital. And its most famous patient is probably Louis Armistead of Pickett's Charge fame. But on behalf of the American Battlefield Trust and the Gettysburg Foundation, I'm Chris White. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting battlefield preservation and education.